Okay, we're giving this another try. Week 8, progress report lecture number 2. All right, so you should be able to see in front of you what happens during week 8. You can see that there's, as always, some reading to do. Progress reports, why are they important in research? Some of you are doing primary, some of you are doing secondary, and of course, research will play a different role in both of those items. Activity reports, how to do an activity report, what that looks like. And of course, more of annotated bibliographies, particularly for those of you who are doing a lot of research. Notice there is a quiz here once you've listened to these lectures 1 and 2 and done all the readings. Then you're going to be answering this. One of the items here I wanted to point out is Gantt charts, functioning of Gantt charts. Some of you are having Gantt chart items in other classes. Some of you have not a whole lot of Gantt chart stuff. I will be providing some links for you to figure out some Gantt chart stuff too if you want to try it. It can be done both with Excel, but also with Microsoft Word to make a really simple one. But a Gantt chart is a common tool that you'll find in use in the work world just about everywhere. So, take a look at that, and before you take this week 8 quiz. All right, so let me pull up our first slide. Okay, so progress report number 2. Why do progress reports matter? And some of you are asking this question even after lecture number 1. And so I put in a quote here for you. Progress reports are an essential part of the research. They help to manage your projects. They help to secure your funding. Stakeholders need to know that you've completed certain stage of this project before they release certain further funds. Now that could be a grant. It could be a funding for a particular project, section of a project. It could be all kinds of different things, right? And sometimes funding isn't necessarily just money either. It might be support. So keep all of this stuff in mind when you're trying to figure out how do I make a progress report matter. So I want to talk a little bit about what a progress report is not. So it is not the proposal, right? You made the proposal. It's not the final white paper, right? It's somewhere in between. This is something that helps you with the documentation. It helps me to get a feel for where you are in the project and what you need to accomplish yet. It also does the same thing for you, kind of helps clarify those items for yourself. Remember that your boss, and of course in this context your professors, have multiple sections of courses, right? So on some particular semesters, I might have up to 70 students that I'm managing with this particular course all at the same time in different sections, right? And that might be true for a boss in the work world too. You're not the only person that's giving them a progress report. There may be multiple people doing multiple projects, giving them progress reports all at the same time. And you have to keep that in mind and give the context about what you're doing, right? Don't assume that they will remember all that context when they have all these other projects that they're managing in their head at the same time. So you need to give some good context about what you're doing. Be very, very straightforward, right? None of this, you don't want lots of words. You want it to be very straightforward, and so that I can see what you're doing immediately, right? You might start with a simple wording like, this is a report on the process of XYZ, right? Remind me. Go through the project timeline chronologically. Discuss your goals. What is it you're trying to do? Remind me. Say, this is what I've done. This is what worked. This is what didn't quite work. And here's how I'm going to fix it. Or we are going to fix it if you're in a group. Remember that those of you doing secondary work do need, of course, continue to contemplate how to make your research work visible to me. It's not just something that you spent hours and hours on the internet. You have to be able to explain, what did you do? What came out of that? Where did you go? What do you still need to do? That's also true with primary work too. Sometimes some of the primary work stuff is invisible to me as your boss or to me as your professor. For example, if you're creating a very large scale project, you might now be in the thick of testing or organizing, right? So some of those tasks that take up a lot of your time, I can't see them. I can't see how much time and energy and frustration that you will put into things or what kind of delays. So you've got to tell me that. You can show that with charts or graphs or drawings. too, right? So we need to see all that stuff. Okay, let's go down a little forward here. I get talking. Let's see. Where do we want to go with this? Hold on here. Here's an example of work completed to date. So this is from maybe a past student that might have given me something similar to this in a progress report. So here's what you might say. Work completed to date. Here's some examples. Researched other similar devices, right? Maybe even in a primary type of report, you needed to say, okay, I need to figure out how did this work, in the industry. What did other people do? What did other companies do? So maybe you need to tell me that. I researched other similar devices in the industry. Or number two, maybe I developed and revised a CAD drawing. Maybe there's multiple versions of it that you need to tell me that you had trouble with, or it took a long time where you had to get data. Number three, maybe you had a CAD drawing that you had to send to multiple fabricators for pricing quotes. That's an invisible thing that I may not be able to see. Now, obviously, these examples are from all different kinds of majors, so they may not apply to you, but thinking about what's invisible and how can I make it visible? How can I tell my boss? How can I tell my professor? Number four, maybe you issued a purchase order, right? So that's a thing that you had to send out, that you had to get back. Maybe during COVID, for example, we had lots of problems with that, right? There was just stuff that you couldn't get, and suddenly there was all these delays that were unanticipated. So in the other part over here on the right here, to date, the following tasks have been completed. So you want to tell me these things. What have you completed? Think about this list. Number one, I finalized a survey instrument. Maybe you're doing a survey. Number two, maybe you did a first survey push to 25 people. Maybe number three, you received raw survey results from 32% of those participants. Maybe you began the coding, the thematic coding of the data, right? So those are invisible things unless you tell me. Another thing we want to really make visible are the problems encountered. No matter what your project, in any shape or form, any place, you're always going to have problems. And bosses expect to see those problems. Professors expect to see you discuss those problems. What are the unexpected delays? What are the complications? Maybe you had an error in budgeting of time or resources. Maybe you had to change the scope of your project. How have you addressed the problems, or how will you address those problems? And if the scope of the project has changed, here's where you're going to explain how that's going to work. We expect to see these things. If there are no problems, we go, strange. Okay, so here's some problems that we have in past students. Maybe a purchase order wasn't issued. Maybe you forgot. Oops. Number two, project lead time has been slow. Maybe there's supply chain availability of parts. Number three, maybe that CAD drawing indicated the weight of the finished prototype was too high. Oh no, what do? We have to start over, or we have to fix it. We have to find some other way to make that weight down. So other problems, like over on the right-hand side, maybe my survey participation was too low. Maybe I did a survey, I sent it to 25 people and only 3 people responded. Now what am I going to do, right? Right, so I have to figure out what am I going to do about this problem. Maybe coding slowed down because I didn't have enough data. Right? So maybe the data results surprised me and I went, oh, that is not what I expected. And now I need to change my research questions or even send out a second push, changing my research questions back to the same people and saying, hey, you know what? This is not expected. Could you maybe answer some further questions? Also a section on work to be completed, right? So what is coming next? We want to estimate the work to be completed before the next report, right? What's my next targets? What are my next due dates? What are my next things I need to accomplish? Look at your task list again. There probably are problems with it, right? You made it at a point when you didn't have all the information you needed. Now, is it going to hold up? Maybe you need to revise that and say, okay, these tasks, maybe I need to break a big task into smaller pieces or components. How does that work? How are you going to finish the project in the second half of the term? So we've made it halfway. How are we going to make it the second half, right? We want to see that. So here's some examples. Number one, installation of a prototype. Maybe you have to figure that out because it's taking longer. Maybe it's the next thing that happens. Number two, we need to monitor and perform a trial run. Maybe that's a survey. Maybe that's a primary thing that you're creating. Maybe number three, you need to gather feedback from users. Did it work? How did it not work? What do I need to do better? Number 4, update the prototype according to your feedback, right? Tell me those things, plan for those things. Number 5, document your finished work. How did it work? How can you put it in a chart graph so we can see it? Next steps over here on the right. Maybe you need to do a second push of surveys, right? Maybe again you have those initial 25 or 50 people and you need to send it out again to them. Maybe you need to finalize coding for those factors, for the new questions or the new things that you had to change. Number 3, maybe you had to finalize coding for themes, right? Sometimes that's a little more complicated than you might expect. Now, again, some of you are going, oh, I'm not doing it that way. These are just examples from the past. You're all going to have to find ways to do it that work for you, okay? And a revised timeline. Now, some of you are keeping Gantt charts, and I'll show you an example of a Gantt chart here. Maybe you need to keep updating your Gantt chart, or you have another type of timetable that you're keeping track of. Here is an example of a revised timeline. You may want to pause me at this point in time just so you can take a picture of this if you want to have a picture of what it might look like. Notice that we are using color coding, and up here on the, let's see, up here, upper right, if I can make it work, there you go. There's a legend, right? So what does the green mean? What does the dark green mean? What is the red? What is the orange? What is the yellow? These are things, in this case, we have months up here, January, February, March, and April. We have each of the weeks listed here separately. And over here, we have the tasks. Now, if you're in a group, you may have color coded it based on who's doing what and how much time it's taking. This is the idea with a Gantt chart or a timeline, is so that you can send it to a boss and the boss can hold it up really quickly and visually see the progress and the problems really quickly. Okay, so I can see here real fast, yellow says it was completed. Here I was completed, and we designed those gears, and it was completed back in January. Right, so do we still have time? Are we still in the green? The red here is saying, okay, last week, that's a problem. If we're already there in April, then we have an issue, right? I should be able to see that really quickly. Here's a revised timeline if you choose to do it this way. Again, tasks would be over here on the left, start dates, end dates, completed, or sometimes we see percentages over here. How far are you completed? As long as I can see that you are keeping track of things very closely and chronologically, this is both of these things are fine. Now, again, appendix. If you're doing a primary research, your appendix is going to be a substantial chunk of the work due to date, right? So along with each item you include in this, I want a brief paragraph, that's 3, 4, 5 sentences, describing what it is you've included, how you're going to use it for your final presentation and white paper at this point. That could, of course, change. I want to see CAD renderings, diagrams, or images. I want to see pictures, right? I want to see visuals, right? If you're doing primary research, then I want you to show me what you're doing. I want to know the methodology and specifications, like what in the final paper you're going to be explaining the methodology, how you did it, the specifications of how exactly you went about testing. I want to know how this is going to work here. Or I want to see a chunk of coding or system design if you're in computers. Now, note that probably most of your classmates and myself as well aren't going to understand what the coding means if we're not in computer. So I suggest taking a chunk of it or a window, putting it there, and then including, notes, including information about what does this mean? What am I looking at, right? Again, you would always include context for all the people who are not in your field, because they're going to be looking at it too. It might be a professor, a boss, it might be human resources, it might be somebody who's trying to sell your product. They need to know what things do. So you've got to be really clear about how that works. Okay, if you're doing primary research, your goal is to show you've made progress, how that progress is going to be used. By the way, sometimes primary research projects are different, and you have to figure out a creative way to do that. Sometimes you need to include secondary research appendices or research sources as well. Sometimes that happens. If you're doing secondary, of course, here's an example of what one might look like. If we were using this particular source, Mindful Technology, author is Corbett, we might have something like this.